everybody. Welcome to Ask the Pastor. I am Matt Love. I am here with Pastor J.D. Greer, but also, and importantly for this question, former SBC President J.D. Greer. And we're back with another episode. J.D., you were the president of the SBC. You are the lead pastor of the Summit Church.
Yes, both those things are true.
Over the years that those things have been true, there's been a lot of talk about the ways in which you've kind of pursued, when you were president of the SBC, diverse appointments and different committees and positions and things like that. And then even here at the Summit, how kind of we've celebrated the diverse makeup of our staff. And then maybe in the much broader, world, there's this conversation going on about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and how that is pursued in companies or in government, and the limitations or challenges or issues with that. And we know there can be some problems with how that plays out. So today's question for you is the deliberate pursuit of ethnic unity in the church the same as DEI? And so, in other words, why do you think we still need to be deliberately pursuing ethnic unity in the church, and how do we do that in a biblical way?
Yeah, and again, for those that might be unfamiliar, there's been a couple things here. When you're saying as a church, we actually want to be intentional about having diversity on our staff because that helps us in reaching people. Is that essentially just a DEI kind of like, hey, we want to have the right balance, and so we're gonna have quotas and that sort of thing. People say it is, absolutely it is. That's all that is. There's no other version of that. I mean, I've had that thrown at me, several things. When I was president, we would appoint committees from the states. Each state has a certain number of representatives, and we wanted to be intentional about having the representatives reflect the diversity of the SBC in every way, not just racially, but sizes of churches and everything. And that's just quota and DEI. Yeah. The idea is that it's a violation. I've been told it's a clear violation of Galatians 3:28, which is in Christ we're all we're neither male nor female, Jew or Greek. And here we're saying I intentionally want somebody that's African American or Hispanic or Asian, not white. Or James 2, where it says we show partiality. That's the other thing, and Scripture tells us not to do that. Honestly, I feel like we need a little sanity here. I mean, there's a biblical version of this, and there's an unbiblical version of it, and they are different. There is an unbiblical DEI that really is about quota and virtue signaling and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, just take it out of the race context. If I'm hiring a pastor here to minister to our senior adults, and I say, I'd really like that person to be over 50. Is that ageism? Or is that realizing that somebody over 50 is actually going to help me reach people that are over 50? In Acts 6, you got a very clear biblical example of it where, I always want people to, I'm like, how do you process through this? Here you've got, the Hellenistic Jews that are being neglected. And so they asked the all Hebrew Jew apostles, hey, we got to deal with this. And they select men who become the first deacon board, and they're all, by their names, you can tell they're all Hellenistic Jews, which means there's no question that the racial makeup actually affected their being qualified for the position because of the kinds of work they were being asked to do. In fact, who points that out? John MacArthur.
Yeah. The ultimate DEI advocate.
Yeah. Big DEI advocate. Was he promoting DEI? Was he, were the apostles doing that? Well, no, it's just that in order to take care of this need in the church, they knew they needed representation from people in that group. When Southern Baptist pastors called for more pastors of smaller churches to be represented on our stage, rather than always just being the mega church pastor show, is that like some kind of violation of Galatians 3:28? Or how about this? When international missionaries have gotten a core group and people believe the gospel and they want a national representative to lead that church, is that a violation of Galatians 3:28? And if you say no, then by what logic are you going to differentiate that practice from being intentional and diversifying leadership? We recognize that for certain things, it's actually part of the job. It's part of the mission to do that. There are certain kinds of people we want to reach here in the Triangle that we know that actually will be helpful. We always want to say reflect the diversity of our community for missional reasons while we proclaim the diversity of the kingdom. That same thing when it came to appointing people on committees. I'm like, it's just part of the job description. Committee appointments are supposed to represent the various populations of states and churches and even perspectives. And so in a mission-driven network where the playing field is supposed to be level, that's not the same as a DEI quota at a corporation or in a skill-based industry. These were chosen as representatives. By the way, I always point out, I'm building on a foundation. This wasn't like I came up with this when I was president, like, hey, this will look, cool for virtue signaling. I mean, Southern Baptists had consistently called for this for close to 40 years. In 1973, the year that I was born, the SBC passed a resolution calling for greater use of ethnic representation in our agencies. They did it again in 1974, again in 1986, and 1989. In 1996, Southern Baptist Convention is what they called their interagency council. They appointed this racial reconciliation task force. It was chaired by a guy named Richard Land, who, again, if you know anything, he's not your flaming DEI advocate.
Yeah.
And he called for SBC agency heads to strive for representation, and I'm quoting him now, on our boards of trustees, our staffs, and our faculties, and all our other bodies based on biblical qualifications and embracing the ethnic diversity of the Southern Baptist Convention and its churches. In 2008, the SBC passed a resolution about celebrating the growing ethnic diversity. It had 3 separate clauses about pursuing balanced representation of our ethnic diversity in denominational service. In 2011, the SBC approved recommendations to be proactive and intentional in the inclusion of individuals from all the ethnic and racial identities represented in the SBC. Al Mohler, again, not a flaming DEI advocate by any means, called the need to be proactive and intentional in the inclusion of individuals from all ethnic and racial identities. He called that a moral imperative, a moral responsibility for Southern Baptists. So you're like, well, was he promoting DEI? I mean, the point is there is a biblical version of this that Southern Baptists and evangelical leaders have represented for years. And then there's an unbiblical version of it, but just doing one does not make you guilty of the other.
Yeah.
One of the things I kind of point out just very practically is when I think, okay, we need a student pastor, and, there's a certain percentage of our immediate community here that is not white, and I think, okay, I need a student pastor. So I call up 3 friends. I grew up in a white context, so my 3 friends that I call, they're white, and then they give me some recommendations, and the majority of them end up being white. And so it wasn't that I intentionally left African Americans or Hispanic out. It's just that I don't have the network relationship. So I have to be intentional I've been intentional about developing friendships with black pastors and then also calling them to say, hey, could I have some names? Not because I want to hire a less qualified African-American over a more qualified white guy.
Yep.
In fact, the problem is I just don't know about the highly qualified African-Americans. So I just want to make sure that I know about them, and that requires intentionality. Without intentionality, you end up going through the same relational furrows that you've always gone in, and you'll end up with the same thing you always ended up with. And to be able to bring unity to the church, that requires some intentionality. I love how, I've heard it explained. Paul could have saved himself a lot of heartache if he had just gone into Ephesus and planted First Baptist Jew on one side and First Baptist Gentile on the other. But instead, he chose to plant one and do the hard work of bringing these 2 cultures together, being intentional about leadership and representation, because he believed the beauty of a unified and ethnically, economically, and gender unified church was a more compelling witness to the gospel than to have everybody siloed in their separate communities. So my answer to that is I do not backtrack on it. I don't apologize for it. I think there is an unbiblical version of DEI that violates James 2 and Galatians 3:28, and I think there's a biblical version of it that is pastorally wise and missionally helpful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you talked about this in the last episode, but so much of this, like social media and these different kind of soundbitey type places we communicate, it just lends itself to these big, it's very easy to lob the accusation of quote unquote DEI and more just like everything that goes along with that in, political parlance and all this kind of stuff, rather than really trying to understand, well, what are we actually doing? What are we actually trying to see happen? What does that look like? Your example about your network is, I think, so helpful. It's not about trying to find a less qualified person who fits a category,
right?
But rather make sure my network includes all the qualified people.
Yes, I want the most qualified people, and I only know about a portion of them.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thanks, JD. I and so many others appreciate you weighing in on these, heavier conversations that are, because even a podcast like this, it'll be easy to take something small out and say, look, this proves whatever. But I appreciate you kind of stepping into these conversations.
Matt, I appreciate you being the provocateur.
Exactly right. And if things ever get too bad, I know you can just kind of tie it to me and kick me to the curb, and that'll be out.
He was the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
That guy, he was always poking the bear.
I'm here to be your scapegoat whenever you need it. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode of Ask the Pastor. If you want more from Pastor JD, please subscribe to his YouTube page by searching j.d.greer. Always can go to jdgreer.com to find both those places, find blogs and sermons and other things like that. And we'll see you next time on Ask the Pastor.